So I'm really excited to talk to you all because, I mean, I've been on the facilitator team for this project, as you know, but also I really have learned a lot about evaluation through this process, especially like from my co-facilitators and from all the stories in the field that we've had over the course of the 2 seasons. That has, at various points, as I've been thinking about evaluation for professional development, like been popping up in ways that are interesting, at least to me, that I think I wouldn't have thought about if I hadn't been digging into it sort of through the process of these workshops. So I'm going to share just a couple of quick things about some workshops we've done. And we've done these workshops called Integrating Outdoor School into the Classroom. They're typically in-person workshops that are geared towards classroom teachers specifically, and are focused on sort of what are the things that teachers can be doing before, during, and after outdoor school to maximize the academic and social emotional benefits of outdoor school for their students. So kind of like, how do we make sure that we put students into this on-ramp for success so that when they get off the bus at your site, right, they're as prepared as possible academically and social emotionally to be successful there. And so we've done around 10 of them around the state over the last couple of years. And next slide, please, Libby. I'm going to share just a couple of aspects of the process of these workshops that relate to evaluation. And the first is about one particular activity that we do in the workshop, which actually, Catherine, you kind of set up nicely for this because it's in some ways a little bit similar to your animal chips activity. So I'll talk about this photo activity card piece that we do in the workshops and how we've changed that a little bit over time. And then just a few thoughts about workshop evaluation overall for this series of workshops that we've done around the state. So I'm going to talk about the photo activity cards first. Okay, so do not try to read that card on the top left. Basically, we have these sets of cards that all of these are shockingly public domain images. There are beautiful images available in the public domain. It's amazing. So we have these sets of cards that we use in the workshop, and we send each teacher back to school with a set of them, where we do an assortment of activities that they could do before or after outdoor school with their students to try to learn a little bit more about how their students are feeling or thinking about outdoor school. So if you can click for me, please, Libby. So as an example, we do an activity where we ask them to pick a photo that represents or relates to something that someone, could be a friend, it could be a parent, it could be a teacher, might be nervous or worried about before outdoor school, right? And we phrase this one in this way because this one they're going to be sharing out loud with the group or with a partner, and they might not feel comfortable, or it might feel too vulnerable to share, like, here's the thing that I'm really feeling afraid about in this group setting. And another example is like something you are excited about or looking forward to at outdoor school. So in the workshop, we actually do this with teachers. We have them actually participate. You as a teacher answer these questions as yourself, a person who's going to be going to outdoor school. And then after we do the activity, actually after we do every activity in this type of workshop, we put up this slide, next one, called Thinking Explicitly About Equity, where we take all of the activities that we've done and we talk about things like who's included and advantaged by this approach. So if we use these photo activity cards, who might be left out if we do this activity? Who's centered in this? How might students engage with this material differently than I do? And in one of the workshops that we did using these photo activity cards, we had a teacher say, as we were talking about this, I'm a very literal person and I'm not really able to think in metaphors. And so this was really hard for me because so many of the cards require you to think sort of metaphorically about what this might have to do with outdoor school. And so I heard this and immediately I was like, okay, we need to expand this photo deck to include more examples of sort of like things that you would literally find or see or maybe experience at outdoor school. And so we asked, hey, would that be helpful? And not just to the one teacher who had said that, but we then kind of talked about it, and teachers were like, yeah, that actually would be really helpful because, you know, fifth and sixth grade, like a lot of students are sort of in this transition of really being able to think in a more metaphorical way. Like it would just be a much more flexible activity for us. And so my tendency, like naturally, is to be like, okay, I'm gonna just start making a list and I'm gonna expand this card deck with all of these ideas that I have about like things that students might be nervous about or excited about related to outdoor school. But truly, because of the conversations we've been having in this series, I was like, who should I be asking this question to? And it's not me. And so at the next workshop, we actually built in, this was one I did with Libby, we put up a poster, and Libby, if you can go to the next one, where we actually just like crowdsource all of these ideas about what could we make cards for. And then next one, please. Based on those ideas, we expanded the card set considerably to have a lot of the things that teachers were saying, both on the poster paper and in other conversations we were having with them, that kids are excited about or nervous about at outdoor school. And since then, we've now used the new set. It's been really interesting to me to see the different types of things, because we usually do at least one or two of the prompts in a circle where the whole group is sharing out, that the sorts of things that people are sharing really have changed a lot when we moved from these sort of more like metaphorical images, and we haven't cut those off. Those are still in the deck, but have offered the opportunity for people to sort of have their ideas launch off of these ones that are more literal. So that's kind of one example of a little journey, mini journey that we went through related to like, what's the feedback that we're getting during these events, and how do we actually take that? Who do we need to ask about how to do this differently? And then how do we sort of implement that? And then the second thing that I wanted to talk about briefly, if you could go to the next one, Libby, is about how we evaluate the workshops overall. Don't worry about trying to read this. The point I want to make here is that we have been using the data collection plan worksheet, now also known as the evaluation project plan, that we used a lot in season 1 to try to figure out, how are we defining quality? How are we defining success? And then like, what are we actually trying to learn when we're evaluating professional development? And so I'm going to zoom us in on one part of this, and you can actually click, Libby, all the way to the next slide. One of our goals is to determine the extent to which sessions provide opportunities for participants to consider application in their own context. So one of the ways we are looking at that is like, hey, let's look at the agenda we planned and then the real life agenda we did. Often we've planned for that time for them to maybe do some application in their own context. In reality, are we preserving that time in the agenda when we get behind schedule? Are we giving opportunities for participants to engage with other educators in the outdoor school network and with us? Are they engaging with equity, diversity, accessibility, and inclusion ideas and discussions? And are they learning from each other during the PD experience? And so Libby, if you'll click the next, please. And so we had typically, as I think is a theme for many of us who have been involved in this series, really relying a lot on surveys and using that as sort of a primary way to try to understand the experience. And something that we realized was the surveys were like more or less answering the question, did you get something out of this? Like we were giving an opportunity for people to say, what they liked or what they learned. But really, when we would look at the results from the surveys, the main thing we would get, which is important, is, hey, did people like this, or did people like not have that great of a time? Like that was sort of the level of information we were getting from those surveys, and they just weren't that useful in thinking about how do we plan and move on to next sessions. And so we tried to shift a little bit to thinking about like, how do we learn about what they're getting out of the experience that will help us figure out if we are meeting these goals that are listed up here higher on the screen. And so one thing we tried is to shift the way we do the reflection at the end to let them tell us, instead of us trying to just ask them either super specific questions or did you like this, did you not like this, tell us something that you learned or something that helped you learn, and tell us something you wish you had learned or something that would have helped you learn better. And what I liked about this is that, you know, when you give people sort of, I mean, there's a prompt here, of course, but like we're opening the floor for people to tell us what actually stood out to you about this experience in a positive way or a negative way. And that itself is really useful to know. And so I'm going to show one example. If you'll go to the next one, Libby. So we had in one of these workshops, somebody put up a post-it. Something I learned was how to get health coverage, which this is about getting like nurse coverage for an outdoor school program from the perspective of the school. Well, that's not information that we present because we don't know how you get nurse coverage in your particular school district, right? And so one of our goals was to evaluate whether participants learned from each other during the PD experience. So by making a space where they can offer this sort of information, we were able to learn, oh, well, the person who learned that learned it from someone else who was at this workshop, did not learn it from us. And so that's an indication that they're learning from each other during the PD experience. And it just seems very unlikely to me, who knows, of course, for sure, but that this ever would have come out in the survey if we had been like, okay, now we're going to give a survey instead. And so that's just one example. And so before I close out, a couple of minutes behind schedule, sorry, Stephen, I wanted to just offer like a few of the learning edges and things that I'm still really thinking about a lot as I keep growing with this series and all that we've been talking about. One is like, how do we capture feedback that we receive after an event? So we have, you know, we might put that poster up during the event itself, but often we're hearing things, and I imagine this is true for you too, where like a year down the road, I'll be talking to someone who will be like, oh, yeah, you know, I went to this workshop that Libby did last year and I learned XYZ thing. And like we right now just don't really have a good way to capture those ideas and the information that's coming in that way that actually might really lead us into the second one about understanding more about what's happening after the workshop. So are people applying what we talked about in the workshop? If so, how did it go? Like that, those are kind of, I think, really tightly linked missing pieces from our puzzle, is like, how are we figuring out what's happening after people leave the workshop? We're also thinking about how we add more structure to our facilitator debriefs. And it's actually been really helpful in this series to hear about some of the different ways that you all do debriefs with your staff at the end of the day or the end of the session. So thanks for that. And also thinking about what are the ways to make our PD evaluation process more participatory. So I think we have dabbled in this a little bit, but a lot of the sort of philosophy around it has been driven by conversations that Stephen, Deborah, and I have had, rather than conversations that are coming out of our community. So those are just kind of a few things we're still thinking about. And again, I just want to thank you all for all that you shared during this series because I really have learned a lot that has informed how I'm thinking about eval. Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the, I guess it's a thing we haven't done, but I'm going to say that it seems like it should be easy, but haven't done it yet, so time will tell, is we actually are hearing a lot of information about this, and I bet you are too, where like you hear something a year or two later, a teacher mentions something that happened a couple of years ago when they went to outdoor school, or hey, this thing happened. And right now, we don't have like those ideas. If I'm the person that's told, that idea is essentially stopping with me. It's not, we don't have a way that we're capturing that so that I can make sure that that makes it back to Libby, that somebody told me about this thing that they did in this workshop with Libby 2 years ago that they tried and it worked great, or it didn't work great the first time. And so then we modified it and then this is how it went the second time. And so I think actually just coming up with some, even like a place to capture that will be really helpful. So that's seeming sort of like the low hanging fruit part of it to me. But I think we have a lot more work to do to sort of figure out how we evaluate long-term impacts of PD. What I'm thinking about, especially for like programs that have high school student leaders, like as those programs, like a lot of times those students are coming back as high school leaders to the program that they attended as a 5th or 6th grader. And that's not universal across the state, but like there's probably a lot of things already built into some programs or teachers that are coming back every year, where we kind of have more access to that information than it seems at first glance like we would. So that's something that I'm thinking about because I think right now, as I said, that's a learning edge for us for sure.